evening. I'm Francis Levy, co-director of the Philoctetes Center. Dr. Edward Necessian is the other co-director. And welcome to Our Life in Poetry, New Poets, New Poetics. And I must say this is the youngest group of poets we've had here at the Philoctetes Center, and you're also alive, which was different than some of the other poets. We're really working in that direction. We want the living. In terms of Philoctetes programs, all Philoctetes programs can be seen if you go to www.philoctetes.org. So if you miss a Philoctetes activity, you just go to our website, and it's all archived there. In addition, all Philoctetes programs are simulcast on the internet. So if it's a rainy night, you can't make it here, you just go to the Philoctetes site, and right now, this is being simulcast all over the world. Actually, people write in from places like South Africa, Poland and Romania who have seen Philoctetes. We have a chart of the one person in Romania.
14 people in Romania. We are popular in Romania.
14 in Romania. Okay. In any case, I'm very proud to introduce Michael Braziller. Mike Braziller is president and publisher of Persea Books, a literary publishing company that he founded in 1975. Mike will moderate tonight's panel and introduce our other distinguished, I don't know how to put this, young poets. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Frank, and I'd like to thank Ed Nercessian, Ellen Fertig, Adam Ludwig, and Polly Rosenweich for their help, and Patricia Brody was of special help organizing this particular panel. This is a Philoctetes Poetry First, a reading by three accomplished young writers, followed by a discussion of formative pressures and influences and what of their lives has come into their poems. Each will read for about 10 or 15 minutes and then talk for a little while generally about when poetry first occurred in their lives and about their life in poetry. We'll look a little, it's inevitable, at the regional, the local, family, street, neighborhood, small town, coming of age, along with social awareness, politics, social criticism. Gabby Calvocoressi is the recipient of numerous awards and fellowships, including a Stegner Fellowship in Poetry, a Jones Lectureship in Poetry at Stanford University, and a Rona Jaffe Women Writers Award. Her poem, Circus Fire, 1944, received the Paris Review Bernard F. Connors Prize. Her first collection, The Last Time I Saw Amelia Earhart, was published by Persea Books in 2005 and won the Connecticut Book Award. It was shortlisted for the Northern California Book Award. Ms. Calvocoressi teaches in the MFA program at California College of Arts in San Francisco and in the MFA program in creative writing at Warren Wilson College. Her second collection, Apocalyptic Swing, is forthcoming. A. Van Jordan is the author of Rise, which won the Penn Oakland Josephine Miles Award and was selected for the Book of the Month Club from the Academy of American Poets. His second book, Magnolia, was awarded the Anisfeld Wolf Award and listed as one of the best books of 2005 by the London Times. Mr. Jordan was awarded a Whiting Writers Award in 2005 and a Pushcart Prize in 2006, and is a recent recipient of a John Simon Guggenheim Fellowship. His latest book, Quantum Lyrics, was published in July 2007. He is an assistant professor of English at the University of Texas and serves on the faculty of the MFA program at Warren Wilson College. Patrick Rosal is the author of two full-length poetry collections, Up Rock, Headspin, Scramble and Dive, which won the Asian American Writers Workshop Members' Choice Award, and My American Kundiman, which won the Global Filipino Literary Award. His chapbook, Uncommon Denominators, won the Palanquin Poetry Series Award from the University of South Carolina. His poems and essays have been published widely in journals and anthologies including Indiana Review, the Literary Review, North American Review in Columbia, and the Beacon Best. His work has been honored by the annual Allen Ginsberg Awards, the James Hurst Poetry Prize, the Arts and Letters Prize, and the Best of the Net. He is currently visiting professor of creative writing at the University of Texas at Austin. And I guess we're going to go this way. And once again, there'll be, we're going to be treated to a reading of each of these remarkable writers, and then a brief biographical talk after each one has read. So Gabby, if you want to get started.
Absolutely. It's wonderful to be here tonight. Thank you so much for having me. I can't get over being in this circle. That's wonderful. I'll start with a few poems from my first book and then move into poems from the second book, which is it's autobiographical in a different kind of way. But I thought I would start by reading a few poems about an adult drive-in that was located near my home. My family owned drive-in movie theaters. We did not own the adult drive-in movie theater. If we did, I probably wouldn't be here. I'd be like rolling around in my money somewhere. Yeah. So, but this is what happens when you want to write a poem about your grandparents' drive-in movies, and that doesn't work out. From the adult drive-in, and I'll just read 3 of them. The hill, no, the body unbroken by the strip mall's lights, arced harp of her pelvic bone, a mouth falling upon it like corn cut down in a field I was forbidden to walk through. There are so many kinds of darkness. Her arms tied to the bed, the shadow they cast on the sheets whose brightness illuminates the hushed cars lying below. Dark mouth surrounding the root or pressing against an opening. A dog furrowing into the mole's home, following some distant trembling warmth. Following some distant trembling warmth, I go to the field where the drive-in stood and imagine the women kneeling down again, their bodies splayed against the night sky. The headlights on the hill formed constellations I could trace from one form to another. What was it they wanted that I wanted too? Her body laid bare, the small of her back sure against the man's hand, my hand, an orchard fire, warming blossoms unseen from the roadside. Her mouth finds the woman's thigh, that darkness, and we are all moaning in the pasture. I am the only one hidden, having walked here through the darkening pines. Having walked here through the darkening pines, the woman finds her lover in the abandoned house, some hunter's cabin, feathers everywhere. She's been running, has been pursued, a jealous husband who wants her. Is she afraid? Who cares? We want the fucking to start. The field is so full of hunger that when she bends over, the cars seem to move forward without being turned on. 2 women moving inside each other. He's coming for them, sure as raccoons in grain pails. Their pale skin washes the screen, so we're almost snowblind. They can't see us, or him for that matter, huge in the door frame. He's beginning to unbuckle his pants. There are a lot of poems that take place in this town. There was pornographic theaters and there was football and other things too. And me stuck inside my locker. Every person in this town loves football. Even the nuns come out to watch the boys in their gold and blue. Sister Marita, Sister Anne, and some weeks Sister Perpetua, who still uses the ruler on our outstretched hands. Even the mills get quiet and how the new freeway subsides for a while, so we almost remember the fields full of tobacco and feed corn, the older kids sent out to harvest alongside those men who'd come up from the south. It's hard on the hands, my babysitter told me, and showed the small cuts like netting placed over the palm. She'd calm me down when I woke, or I'd come downstairs and find her splayed out on the couch, head thrown back, and Keith, our quarterback, working above her. Everybody loves that sound. All the breath sucked out of the town, and just as quickly it roars back in, his arm tensed and stuttering till he just lets go. From the arm, from the start of the arc, and now over the heads of Beckett and Pulaski, over the girls in their short, short skirts, to the place where the blast furnace meets the darkness. Who's your daddy? If he lived in this town, he played football, and every girl held his name in her mouth. He wore dress shirts on game day with a tie and his jersey on top. He walked down the halls smelling of Old Spice and chew. Who could break a boy like that? Who could grind his smallest bones or show him the bars where men spill out of their worn leather jackets? Come Friday, we'll turn the lights on. You'll see us from everywhere. This is called a Love Supreme. You beautiful, broke-back horse of my heart. Proud, debonair, not quite there in the head. You current with no river in sight. Current as confetti after parades. You small town. Italian ice shop next to brothels beside the highway. Sweet and sweaty. You high as a kite coming down. You suburban sprawled all over the bed. You dead? Not nearly. Not yet. This new book is called Apocalyptic Swing, and I loved boxing when I was little for lots of reasons. Some sort of probably better than others. Boxers in the key of M. As in marvelous and macho, as in Leon's younger brother Michael, a name I learned in Catholic school. Saint Michael of the mat, of the left hook and the deafening blow, of teeth glistening as they made their arc to the laps of women sitting ringside. You don't like to see a man get knocked out cold? Then you've never lived in Hartford, or any town of broken windows. Have you ever gotten hit or thrown against a wall? There's a sweetness to it. That moment when your God would forgive you anything. One punch free as yesterday's papers. Marvelous, the way his body moved on the TV screen. And me, I moved around the room, bobbed and weaved. I learned to hold my breath so I could fight with my head held underwater. I asked Pat if he would mind if I read this to him twice this week, but Pat's book, both of these poets mean so much to me. In the last 2.5 weeks, I've read R&B by Van Jordan twice a day, every single day. And Pat's books have meant so much, and so I thought maybe we could have a conversation. And this poem is called Praying with Pat, and the title is also based upon the Mingus song Praying with Eric, which is for Eric Dolphy, but it's also autobiographical. Praying with Pat. Come to think of it, I was running already, though not from them. I was just stretching my legs, feeling the new road out. A bridge got built when the highway came through, and all those fields got paved over. No, it wasn't a tragedy. Just more noise and one less place for me to hide. Nowhere hides you better than a wheat field. The wind makes a cymbal from the chaff, so all you hear is the steady shh. Not so different from traffic, just a higher pitch and more modulation. Right, like the difference between someone who's been playing a long time and a kid in 7th grade band. So I was feeling it out, and it wasn't bad, pounding above all that progress. We'd never had progress before. I was proud of my body and how strong it felt. It hadn't always been that way, but that's another story. Funny, as I tell this, I can hear them coming. I'd like to warn myself. Of course, now I listen. I know how a truck sounds as it slows down, just enough to get the job done. Imagine rolling all the field drums into the closet at the end of band practice, and you've just about got it. You can feel it in your gut like Monday coming. I was so close to home that almost no one saw me, soaked in spit and cola, a deep blush forming where the bottle hit my thighs. I have been meaning to write you for some time, but I was surprised how hard it was to speak of this thing we have in common. I'll just read one more. And this is called Rosary Catholic Church. If there's time, I think there's time.
No, there's absolute time.
No
rush at
I think
all.
it might start. I might start actually my biographical talk a little bit by saying that probably one of the reasons I started writing poems. It's interesting being here tonight for lots of reasons, but one is that my mother's mental illness and subsequent suicide when I was 13 was a tremendous influence on sort of this unspeakable thing happening and trying to find a way to make some sense of what could not be spoken about. And at that point was very taboo. I mean, it's still taboo to talk about it in a lot of ways, but and as she became more mentally ill, her relationship to religion became very different, so that everything in our life was metaphor. I mean, everything. And God was someone I was quite drawn to and quite terrified of as well. And the beginnings of her troubles began when she, in 1964, in the summer, when she was pregnant and was sent to a home for wayward girls. And that is the same summer that churches all over the country were being bombed. And so I'm sort of working on this idea of fervor and faith. Rosary Catholic Church. I remember the time she showed it to me. Each bead with a carving of a saint inside. Chasm between robe and flesh, or the hard line of a walking stick, no longer than the leg of a staple. That's what faith was. Something I couldn't see but felt all over. Like a charge, she'd say. Like when they put the wires on my head and I shook and shook. I couldn't imagine. Most days I didn't even try. Why not play outside or bring every can in the house to the store for recycling? Much better than working the one thought over. Mother in the bed, and if I looked closer, Mother with the wires thin as cricket's legs and humming already, before the music even reached her. Mother glistening, Mother glowing with the Spirit, all the windows of her mind blown out and the light pouring in so you can't tell the fire from the moon. And the organ straining in the heat, the groan of the instrument pushed past comfort toward the highest register. But maybe not. Maybe such a low groaning that you could feel it without knowing. How hot the pipes must have gotten. Those men in their white suits stepping back from the body so as not to get caught by the current. And this is just one day, she'd say. This is just one day of suffering. I guess, so I'll talk for a few minutes. So this sort of unspeakable thing happened when I was 13 years old. That there was total silence in my house about it, as there had been about my mother's illness. And I just began writing and sort of these things. I didn't know what they were. I guess they were poems. And at the same time, I lived in this very small town where I had grown up in this very small town with my grandparents, and my grandfather was a lawyer, and so everyone would come to the house. And one thing I began noticing very quickly is that everybody would tell the same story, but totally differently. Everyone would come and say, well, this person did this to me, and this is what happened. And then someone else would come and the same story, but something totally different. And that became something that was very interesting to me, and I think it continues to be in my work, is the idea of how everyone can see, one situation, but speak about it in very different ways. And I was thinking about the idea of biography and what made me start writing. And the other thing that made me start writing, and I say this also because I have many very dear friends in this audience, but one who was that when I grew up in a family that was really interested in music, and particularly my grandfather was very interested in opera. And so I grew up in a house where there was a kind of narrative going on that I was listening to, but I didn't understand the language it was being sung in. So I was always listening to stories where somehow I knew the arc of what was happening, but not because of something I was being told through language I understood. And I think that has a lot to do with something that goes on underneath my work. And then now I live a lucky life of getting to have seen, Van a couple weeks ago as we teach together, and getting to be in the presence of Pat whenever I can be, and Michael and Karen Braziller and Gabe Fried, who save my life on a regular basis. So my biography is it's a lucky life. Okay.
Well, I have some questions for you in these early formative things you're talking about, but we'll circle back to it. Why don't the poems speak for themselves, and it was a great reading, and why don't you read some poems, and then we can circle, and then we'll circle back, Gabby. We'll all have questions for you.
Where do I begin? That was so lovely. I'm just still basking in Gabby's voice right now. Thank you all for coming out tonight. And not only to allow us to read poems, but actually talk about our work and ourselves in a way that we normally never have an opportunity to do. I started out with a very different mission tonight when I was coming here, thinking about what I was going to read. Then when I got, I guess, in the green room, people were telling me that we were going to talk more about ourselves. And so I'm going to read some poems that I normally don't read too much. I have them in the book, but I don't often read them in these settings. So I'm going to start off with a poem called Black Light. In this book, Quantum Lyrics, what I'm looking at, working with is physics as a metaphor throughout the book, unifying theme. And the real issue, the central issue within the book, though, is male vulnerability and trying to wrestle with the public and private personas of men. And so there's a large section in the center that deals with Einstein, his relationship to the pre-civil rights movement. There's sections that deal with comic book superheroes. And then there are these sections that are more personal. I'm going to read some of these, and I think I actually might read some of the comic book stuff too.
What's the title of the poem? There was a poem I read just this morning about a fast food place. It was about one of these poems you're talking about.
That's R&B.
Oh, that's R&B. Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
well,
okay. That's the second request now. You can't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. This is called Black Light. I don't know if folks remember black light bulbs from house parties. I'll get very highbrow. All right. Black light. Our bodies cast a shadow of one body under a black bulb pulse in your mother's basement. Light, even when it's black, moves faster than youth or old age. It's the constant in our lives. But I remember when I thought your house, always ready for a party, even during the week, was the fastest element in my life. Toenails, lint, teeth, eyes. Everything was holy under the glow. I suspect even my bones radiated when we danced, which was always more of a grind than a dance. Whether the song sung came from Rick James or Barry White, we called what we did in the coat room dancing too. My hands ultraviolet under your dress, but innocent. We were only kids after all. I was 16 and you were a woman of 18. Already we knew how to answer each other without asking questions, how to satisfy by seeing what nearly satisfied looked like in each other's faces. This all before I ran out to sneak back into my mother's house in the middle of the night. But now it's 8 years later, you're walking it seems, so I offer you a ride. And you look in and smile. And when I see you, I wonder what would have happened if we had stayed in touch. I have to get back to work the next morning in DC, a 5-hour drive. It's near dark, and I want to get on the road before night falls completely. But I stop anyway. It's been too many years. And I mistake your gesture. Then I realize you don't really recognize me until you back away and turn on your heel. Then a man with a jerry curl in a suit that looks like it's woven from fluorescent lighting walks up and looks at me like I wasn't born in this town. And for the first time in my life, I question it myself. He walks up as slow and sure as any old player should on Sunday night. While walking away, you two exchange words. You don't look back, but we see each other in our heads, aglow, half naked, under our black bulb pulse in your mother's basement. Given a diadem by the lucid night and the street lamp's torch, the man wearing the fluorescent suit casts a broad shadow, like a spotlight into which you step. Maybe he's the reason we're here tonight beneath these dim stars, casting a light true enough, finally, for us after all these years to see each other. I'm also battling a cold. Thank you. Thanks a lot. This next poem is about my first day in college as an undergrad, orientation with my mom. I come from a very blue-collar family, the typical story of the first generation to go to college. And somehow I ended up at a small liberal arts college in Central Ohio. And it's a very different cultural experience for me. I went to a vocational inner city public high school and ended up at this school. And this is called Orientation, Wittenberg University, 1983. And it's sort of a relaxed sestina. You'll hear the right-hand margin, I, color, people, experiences, experience, people, color, I. Ready, fall, study, lost, lost, study, falling, ready. It goes like that. Okay. Orientation, Wittenberg University, 1983. A mock class. My mother and I are the only faces of color. I've never studied with white people, but I've had my experiences. And sometimes having experience is the only way to study people. But is there really a color for ignorance when it hurts self? I can see that I'm not ready. The class is titled The Fall and After, which is a study of what happens after waking up. Loss. At this point, I understand loss more than what comes before, a study lending itself more to the act of falling, and art in itself. How to appear ready to step into the next stanza of life while tumbling down a page. But for now, in this classroom, the discussion of Gauguin, Blake, and the Bible passes over our heads. Suddenly, the Bible is a foreign text in the way they're discussing it. I look down at the page and it looks as blank as the life I must have lived up to this point. The new students and the parents get into this lecture talking about the art of falling. No hard times or unfaithful lovers come up this time. The blues can't frame the talk. It's clear that for some, life is a parent's attempt to prepare a child for this moment. When you walk into a room full of the educated and you need to know what the hell is going on. After class, my mother turns to me and says, you don't, she pauses. You don't have to do this, which gives me pause. She's never said anything like this to me before. I knew even then without skills any job is hell, but then you prepare. You begin your education. I decide what to do before she even gives me an out, while we sit here on the verge of knowing, surrounded by people who sound like they know. Me with a jerry curl, she in a wig, setting out to make a mockery of class, my mother and I. This is Que Sera Sera. It's set in Black Mountain, North Carolina, where I taught for a while, down the road at Warren Wilson College. Que Sera Sera. In my car driving through Black Mountain, North Carolina, I listen to what sounds like Doris Day shooting heroin inside Sly Stone's throat. One would think that she fights to get out, but she wants to stay free in this skin. Fresh, the Family Stones album came out in '73, but I didn't make sense of it till '76, 6th grade for me, the bicentennial. I got my first kiss that year. I beat up the class bully. I was the man. But for now, in my head, it's only '73, and I'm a little boy again, listening to Sly and his family covering Doris's hit, driving down I-40. A cop pulls me over to ask why I'm here in his town with my Yankee tags. I let him ask a series of questions about what kind of work I do, what brings me to town. You know, the kind of questions that tell you this has nothing to do with driving a car. My hands want to ball into fists, but instead I tell myself to write a letter to the chief of police to give him something to laugh at over his morning paper. As I try to recall the light in Doris Day's version of Que Sera Sera, without the well troubling the notes in the duet of Sly and Cynthia's voices. Hemingway meant to define courage by the nonchalance you exude while taking cover within your flesh, even at the risk of losing what some would call a melody. I call it the sound of home, like when a song gets so far out on a solo you almost don't recognize it, but then you get back to the hook. You suddenly recognize the tune, and before you know it, you're putting your hands together, you're on your feet, because you recognize a sound, like a light, leading you back home to a color, rust. You must remember rust. Not too red, not too orange. Not fire or overnight change, but a simmering summer change in which children play till they tire, and grown folks sit till they grow edgy, or neighborhood dogs bite those not from your neighborhood, and someone with some sense says, "Down, boy." Or you hope someone has some sense who's outside, or who owns the dog. And then the sky turns rust, and the streetlights buzz on, and someone's mother, must be yours, says, "You see those streetlights on, don't you?" And then everybody else's mother comes out and says the same thing. And the sky is rust, so you know you got about 10 minutes before she comes back out and embarrasses you in front of your friends. 10 minutes to get home before you eat and watch the Flip Wilson Show or Sanford and Son, and it's time for bed. And it's rust you need to remember when the cop asks, what kind of work you do? It's rust you need to remember, the smell of summer rain on the sidewalk and the patina on wrought iron railings on your front porch with rust patches on them, and the smell of fresh mowed grass and gasoline and sweat of your childhood as he takes a step back when you tell him you're a poet teaching English down the road at the college. When he takes a step back to assure you now that this has nothing to do with race, but the rust of a community he believes he keeps safe. And he says, "Have a good one," meaning day, as he swaggers back to his car. And the color of the day and the face behind sunglasses and the hands on his hips, you'll always remember come back gunmetal gray for the rest of this rusty afternoon. So you roll up the window and turn the music back on and try to remember the rust caught in Sly's throat when the song came out in '73, although I didn't get it till '76, 6th grade for me, the bicentennial. I got my first kiss that year. I beat up the class bully. I was the man. My father died at the end of 2005. So I have a couple of elegies. This is called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. I placed the trombone back on its stand after attempting Summertime in C major. Childhood memories of band camp and lessons string to my embouchure, hands and gut, after the ringing in my head has passed and the notes settle, it seems, at my feet. I linger on a photograph of my family, my parents, brothers, and nephew. I suppose I stare off into it longer than I mean to, thinking of my father, dead 8 months now. The color image blurs a bit on this print, not recalling his smile as I recall it in memory. And also the camera didn't know this would be his last photo, so the occasion was captured with people moving like apparitions in the background, more than the spirit of the man in the midst of it all. Even with digital cameras, there's still a pointillist dotting flesh on the faces of my family. I shake my head to clear the trance and turn on the television. First, news of a woman raped. The pundits keep the stress on alleged. I think of all the women who are watching TV now. I turn the channel to a rerun of CSI. All this technology, yet we still can't prove rape. What's the use of suspending disbelief? I turn the TV off and sit back down to the horn, but it's still next to the photo. This time I notice my father's hand that rests on my nephew's shoulder. My nephew might be practicing his cello as I sit in front of this brass, which turns to folk art in my hands. I don't really play anymore, you know. I once thought music would be my life, and it's simply too easy to try to play and say that's enough. Too easy to say, at least my nephew plays strings. Nothing changes that easily. It's in the way the mouthpiece refuses to kiss me back, how the ceiling fan whirs in the room, yet humidity hangs in the air. A need builds in me, only after struggle builds around me. A mythical ether challenging this horn with its song stuck in its throat. Memory, the present moment, and all the notes falling between them, struggling to get out. I'll just read one more. I'll do R&B. There's a quick reference to C. Dolores Tucker at the beginning of the poem, who's a civil rights activist and former Secretary of State of the state of Pennsylvania, but she really became famous for her work against explicit lyrics and rap music, having explicit lyrics labeled for the misogyny and violence in rap music. R&B. Listen long enough to the radio and you'll think, maybe C. Dolores Tucker was right. While the hip world is falling in love with rappers with marquee quality prison records, I'm falling deeper under the spell of singers who can still play a piano. I never needed my female vocalists to look good in a thong to feel their voices in my bones. I never needed the male crooners to carry guns to know they'd kill for love. I said this the other night driving through Akron, Ohio, a week after my father's funeral, trying to find a station without gangster rap or smooth jazz. For years I watched my father die, and when the day came, my father had already predicted the Chicago White Sox would win it all this year. And on the TV in his hospice care room, as he took his last breath, Jermaine Dye hit the first home run of the series. This is all over now. November. Trees on front lawns rustle and globes on street lamps rattle in a determined wind. I'm looking for fast food and some music to change my mood and the weather. In these silent moments, I listen, open to any sign or savior I can find. I pass a half-lit neon Arby's roast beef sign, struggling through a dark night of orbiting debris. I can barely tell whether they're open or closed, so I take a chance, turn around, and fall into its orbit as well. I walk in and see two young black men, young brothers to me, with cornrows in their hair, and each carrying about 50 pounds more than they should on their young bones, standing behind the counter. One brother asked me if he can take my order, but I can't think about roast beef. I think, why is he so overweight as a teenager? I think, what is he going to look like when he's 40, my age? I think, what is he going to look like if he makes it to 77, my father's age when he died? I shake my head and tell him I'm not ready. I try to focus on food. I'm having a hard time because the music is so loud. Some alternative rock with an emo boy voice. Once I order, the brother who took my order starts to argue with the one making my sandwich. When I think the argument is getting too loud, when I think they're going to come to blows, they burst into laughter. And they stop. And they look at me. And then they look at each other. The brother on the grill nods to the brother at the register, who then, with great earnestness, makes a request of me. Sir, could you please tell him that that's not Al Green? I say, of course that's not Al Green. Then the brother on the sandwich says, nah, not what's playing out there, pointing towards me. What's playing back here, pointing behind him. The register brother says, I don't think he can hear it. So they start to sing, For the Love of You, in harmony and falsetto. When they finish their set, the brother on the register says, tell him that's Ron Isley. Yes, I exclaim, it is the Isley brothers. The sandwich brother confesses, I know. I just wanted to see if he could tell the difference. You got to admit, on some of those songs, Al Green sounds a lot like Ron Isley. Here I insert a caesura while I ponder this cogent point. You know, I say, you've got a point. I never thought about it before, but it's true. If you listen to Ron Isley and didn't know the song, one might mistake him for Al Green. At this moment, I laugh with these brothers louder than I've laughed since my father's death. I'm their last customer, so the brother comes from behind the register to let me out and lock the door. I get outside and walk to my car and get on with what's left of my life as wind tears at the earth, leaves settle around the streets, and daylight subdues again, till one day, through a near-closed window in my mind, I'll see these two young men among the generation I once thought only sampled R&B. I'll hear the vibrato in their voices, and the mind's dust will wipe away with their song. The sharp prongs of moonlight will catch me smiling. A silly look of hope, really. An equation of time and memory breaking through at least 2 generations of my blood.
That's great.
I don't know where to begin as far as my formative years. I didn't grow up reading poetry or thinking about it. I grew up mostly reading comic books, playing with my friends, chasing girls, that sort of thing. And in school, poetry is one of those things that I didn't think I was good at. That when I would raise my hand and think I had an answer, it was always the wrong answer. So I never thought about poetry, as a kid. I didn't think about poetry even in college as an English lit major. I was mostly thinking that I was going to be a journalist. And because I was at this small liberal arts college, the only way to get to journalism was through the English department, which had a minor in journalism. You could take a sequence of classes. And so there, I did have a class with a woman, Dr. Mary Ellen Jones, who was the first person at the school to actually take an interest in me as a student. And one day we had an assignment to write sonnets, and it was the first time I ever had written a sonnet, and it felt right, So I did the assignment like everyone else, but then she called me to her office, which was scary because she had a reputation for being the toughest professor in the department. She hadn't given higher than a C the semester before, and the whole class had taken her to the provost. It was a very conservative school. She was a short-haired, overweight, braless lesbian, and just a complete anomaly there at this school. And so I was scared when I went to her office. But she said, she was very encouraging. She said, I really like your work, and I want to know if you're a poet, and if you're not, you should think about it. That was the first time I actually thought about writing poetry. And so I did. I started writing these really bad love poems, but that was as far as it had gone. And that was in the early 80s. And so years later, I went to grad school. I worked as a journalist in D.C. And then later, I ended up going back to school after going to a reading by Cornelius Eady. This was in November 15th of '94. I heard him read at the Folger Shakespeare Theater in D.C. And it was the first time I'd seen an African-American male poet, as a professional poet. And it did something to me. He read this poem, Gratitude. It was this Ars Poetica, beautiful, sprawling poem. And Cornelius is about 10 years older than me. He's from Rochester, New York, which is a lot like Akron, Ohio, the town I grew up in. And he had all these scenes in this poem that were very similar to moments in my own life. And I found in the middle of the poem that I was starting to cry. And it was the first time I'd ever been moved by art in that way. I never cried at a movie or anything else in my life at that point, and didn't understand what that was. And so I knew then that it had a different power and resonance that I hadn't experienced before. And then the more I had written, the more I read publicly work that I was working on, almost completely unformed. I realized also it was the first time that people listened to me across generational lines, racial, cultural lines, regional lines, as a black male, listen to me in a way they wouldn't listen to me in a conversation. There's a very different way of having a dialogue with the world. And so for me, it became the medium through which I could start engaging with others.
That's great. Okay, we'll come back to that.
Okay.
Patrick? Okay.
As the reading approached, Mike called me up and was talking about kind of the focus of what we're going to do and how, you know, our lives in poetry was going to kind of be the lens that we were going to use for the evening, and also, you know, our formative years and our influences. And so my influences are really all over the place. They're very disparate, and so I'm going to read a lot of really different kinds of poems.
Okay, I prepare you all for a slightly different style of reading than we've heard this evening, but it's very much Pat and really very...
Todo tiene su final, nada dura para siempre. Tenemos que recordar que no existe eternidad. Freddie claimed lineage from the tough boogie down Boricuas who taught him how to up rock, head spin, scramble, and dive. We called it a suicide. The front flip b-boy move that landed you back flat on the blacktop, that was Freddie's specialty. The way he'd jump into a fetal curl mid-air, then flap against the sidewalk, his body laid out like the crucified Jesus he knocked down one afternoon in his mom's bedroom looking for her extra purse so the both of us could shoot asteroids and space invaders until dusk. I wasn't long before Freddie disappeared, then returned one day as someone else's ghost, smoked out on crack singing, Todo tiene su final, nada dura para siempre. Tenemos que recordar que no existe eternidad. That was the first summer we believed you had to be good at something. So we stood around and watched Freddie on the pavement all day doing suicides until he got it right. Todo tiene su final, nada dura para siempre. Tenemos que recordar que no existe eternidad. I had everything lined up, and then these guys really messed me up because I wanted to.
Pat, read whatever.
I want.
Really read what you feel like reading.
I wanted to, you know, I did this residency with this artist named Beth Campbell who does these really interesting conceptual things. One of her pieces is actually in the lobby of the Whitney right now. You can check it out. There'll be kind of like these alternate life decision trees that she makes. But she said, when we were out this residency together, she said, all I want to do is participate. You know, and a little bit, you know, jumping off from what Van was saying is, you know, you just want to be part of the conversation. You just want to be part of the big conversation, right? So Gabby had made reference in one of her poems about running. And this is a poem about my own about the white boys who drove by a second time to throw a bucket of water on me. The first time, they merely spat on me and drove off. I stood there a while, staring down the road after them as if I were looking for myself. I even shouted my own name. But when they cruised past again to toss a full bucket of water and who knows what else on me, I charged, sopping wet after their car. And though they were quickly gone, I kept running. Maybe it was hot that August afternoon, but I ran the whole length of Main Street, past the Five and Dime where I stole Spalding's and Rabbit's Feet, past the Raritan Bus Depot and Beau's Den and the projects where Derek and them scared the shit out of that girl. I pumped the thin pistons of my legs all the way home. Let's get real. It's been 25 years, and I haven't stopped chasing them through those side streets in Metuchen, each pickup b-ball game, every swanky midtown bar. I've looked for them in every white voice that slurred and cursed me within earshot, and every pink and pretty body whose lights I wanted to punch out and did. To be honest, I looked for them in every set of thin lips I schemed to kiss, and this is how my impossible fury rose, like stone in water. I ran all 7 miles home that day, and I've been running ever since, arriving finally here. And God damn it, I'm gonna set things straight. The moment they drove by laughing at a slant-eyed yellow-backed gook, they must have seen a boy who would never become a man. We could say they were dead wrong, but instead, let's say this: their fathers gave them their rage, as my father gave me mine. And from that summer day on, we managed to savor every bloody thing that belonged to us. It was a meal, constantly replenished, a rich bitterness we've learned to live on for so long, we forget how, like brothers, we put the first bite in one another's mouths. The woman you love cuts apples for you. I used to date a woman in London, and it was the summer of 2003, and Western Europe had that terrible heat wave where thousands of people had died. That was the summer that I was in London, and the summer that she and I had fallen in love. And in her backyard, she had an apple tree. And one morning she went back there and she plucked a few of the apples and she cut them up and she put them in vinegar and salt. And I hadn't eaten this in a very long time. So that was kind of the triggering point for this poem. The woman you love cuts apples for you and stirs them in sea salt and vinegar. She takes a drag from her silk cut, eases again through the fruit's flesh, the blade stopping short of her thumb. You are both sweating at the shoulder, East Ham's hottest summer, and you realize these are not the times to come to poetry. You have everything you need. Your father's bone-hard stare can't reach across the Atlantic, so you save yourself for another day because there is this woman slicing apples, stirring them in vinegar, reminding you of an afternoon 25 years ago when you knelt with your brothers at your mother's feet to pluck apple slices from a small basin pinched between her legs. And one of you would lift that bowl almost completely empty except for a sour, clouded liquid and a few seeds shifting at the bottom. You just taste it first, but soon you're handing it from brother to brother, gulping lungfuls of that tart cider. You'd sweat, sniffle, gasp, chug till your lips turned white and numb, and before you went out into those Jersey streets, you'd rinse your chin, you'd soap your hands because the girls would hold their breath for every reason and stink on your fingers and neck. You won't dare tell anyone you've learned to love the taste of something so strange. Until this woman cuts apples for you in vinegar and the familiar fumes fill your nostrils and gullet. She will lift the bowl to drink. She'll twist her face and laugh when she offers it, and you will drink, and she will drink, and you will drink again. She will kiss your cut knuckle. She'll kiss your eyes. Of course the vinegar stings. It's the hottest summer ever in London, and you and the woman you love fall asleep side by side like this, reeking and unwashed, breathing in each other's dreams of open skin. I'm just going to read one more.
There's no rush, Pat. Yeah, read a couple.
Yeah, read a couple?
Yeah.
Okay. Gabby read A Love Supreme. I'm going to read Naima. Naima. Mothers, a sudden fog of honeysuckle will guarantee you no sadness. You can deny your children. Let me tell you a story. If you know how the A train gores the dark with a steady hum, perhaps you've come across an old Caribbean man patting his ass, his lapels, first his front pockets, then again the back, looking apparently for a wad of bills. He mumbles inward, then reports to you, $300. I had $300. He looks you in the eye to assure you he's known crueler losses. And although heaven likes to bore us, a woman dressed in tattered black makes her entrance as the old Caribbean leaves, and at the same time, a trio of grade school boys, the first chaos of spring in them about to erupt, fling down a canvas sack foaming with fresh-cut honeysuckle. They place too on the subway car's floor a radio. They bounce on their toes with a kind of pre-fight jitter. The woman in black, in fact, has a boxer's underbite and announces herself like this: "Ladies and gentlemen, please find it in your hearts to help a starving artist." So you can't blame the biggest boy for slapping the middle boy on the back of the neck when the younger one reaches for the radio's play button. Can't blame the older one who sucks his teeth at the younger one as if to say, "Let her sing." By now, you've almost completely forgotten the Caribbean man when the woman eases out her first perfect raspy sob. There are only a few of us who don't recognize the tune. And since we think we can own what's beautiful by disdaining it, we try to pretend we can't hear what legacy of misery trembles the tunnel walls. How explain you're watching a stranger hobble by and you have to lift your eyes twice to make sure it isn't someone you love? I'm old enough now to understand every silence is remarkable, which is to say, these boys sway with their own impatience and the impatience of their fathers, as the woman in black walks the length of the train with each crystalline note poised in the air that trails her, and there is not a scowl among us when behind her the end doors gently smash, signaling the boys to blast the train with a backbeat, then throw their bodies down in dance, as if to translate everything we've lost today into a joy we will finally comprehend. The boys shut off their radio, gather their capful of dollars and rabble of white blossoms, and pounce out at the next stop in single file, but not, I swear to you, without unfurling the first four notes of Coltrane's Gorgeous Groan. The subway doors close. This is the end of the story. We ascend one by one from the dark, and beneath us, Harlem's steady moan resumes. I'll read one more, which is a little bit longer than the other ones. I've been interested in the last couple of years increasingly in, in the intersection between dream and fact, in the way that facts can inhabit dream, but the way that dreams also inhabit fact. Just the other day, my brother sent me, or last week, he sent me that the article of a man who looked like he was part tree, because he didn't have the right immune system to stop this kind of growth, and it looked like there was bark growing from him. That to me was a kind of a manifestation of something that was dreamlike. Before that, there was the young girl in India who was born with 8 limbs, and so this poem in part was triggered by that, imagining what this girl dreams of. So this is it's a litany. It's a long list poem, and it's called "The Dream of the Girl with 8 Limbs." Hands to hustle, hands to sing, hands to pick kindling from the brambles, hands to alight, hands to haggle a crucifix for bread, hands to break across long stones, hands to ache against wood, hands to nail them still, hands to haul water from the infant's grave, hands to cover the puny heart, hands to pound that muscle back to its beastly life, hands to write these lies, hands to cross them out, hands to lug the goat by rope to the bloody block, hands to sting, hands to coax the first lick of honey from your hips, hands to cut gristle from gut, hands to murder time, hands to tell it, hands to behemoth, hands to sting, hands to tie a perfect knot around the throat, hands to lead the rest of the body blind, hands to count piggies and Injuns, hands to pinch the cigar's burnt out stub, hands to bid on field niggers, hands to clench the 6-foot whip, hands to crack it, hands to yank it back by the tip, hands to fill deep wells, hands to shoot the shoddy guns, hands to solder the metal mouth shut, hands to salute the shroud, and hands to stain it with berries and blood, hands to hold small animals underwater, hands to untame them, hands to burn the cassock, hands to sew it to the skin, hands to open the book to blasphemy, hands to hold it to flame, hands to splash chin deep in muddy waters, hands to sallow white linen and spoil the wall and flap the fifth, hands to raise the motherfucking roof, hands to dial up the demons at 2 a.m., hands to pin down their wrists, hands to light the last cold lanterns, hands to welcome winter's tooth, hands to twist the bent bronze key before it snaps off in the frost, hands to pick the lock and pluck the jewel, hands to slide it deep inside the sleeping king's throat. Hands to separate one lamb from the next, hands to pour the bitter liquor, hands to sip from, hands to slap the dumb child across his good eye, hands to test the rivers, hands to paddle you out, hands to exhume the living, hands to offer rock salt to horses, hands to grip the crowbar, hands to drive the heavy hook into the giant's left knee, hands to gouge it for its cartilage, hands to catch cold rain, hands to spit in, hands to catch lightning, hands to caress the wreckage, hands to push it off your chest, hands to pull the stocking up mid-thigh, hands to shred the wings of swans, hands to drive the mule that pulls the plow, hands to savage his rump with a wrist-thick switch, hands to beat the broken piano for bass, hands to hold the bowler's blade, hands to hack in half a coconut, hands to lift to your lips the husk, hands to stall the gods like pelicans, hands to flock them, hands to feed them, stale cornbread, sugar, dead fish.
Oh, great.
I came to poetry really late. I didn't much like books, but that's not to say that I didn't start writing poems until my mid-20s. But that's not to say that my education into poetry didn't start very early on. I was I don't know if you got the reference in the first poem, but I was a dancer. I was a street dancer. I was a b-boy. I was a breaker, and I was a musician. I wanted to go to conservatory. My family's filled with musicians, and my dad didn't want us to. He didn't want us to become musicians because we wouldn't earn any money, so I became a poet. But but all that is to say that my life as a dancer and my relationship to my body, even as it's changed over 4 decades, right? And my relationship to music and the things that I hear, and my relationship to stories, because my brothers and my uncles and my aunts are a bunch of shit talkers. All that stuff has kind of informed what I write about and how I write. My father is also an ex-Catholic priest. He was a Thomistic scholar, so he was a theologian for the Catholic Church. Many of my poems also deal with like a struggle with faith. Poising yourself between belief and disbelief, right? In some ways, it's kind of like it's the product of being the son of immigrants in America. You have this incredibly rich and disparate background to draw from, and friends and family to steal stories from.
Well, I'll throw out one thing to get the ball rolling, and that is cadence. Music interests me in all 3 of your work. Gabby, do you want to? You talked a bit about opera, and you have a very, very unique cadence. Do you want to take it? Yeah. Well.
Opera was something that affected me. When I was younger, I hope I'm still young, but when I was very young, there were 2 things. I would hear sermons in church, right?
Yeah.
And then I went to Catholic school, even though I had just moved in with my father and my stepmother, and they were very anti-church, but Catholic school was the only school that that I could get what they thought of as a decent education. And the nuns loved me because they said to, my parents said to the nuns, she is not to go to church services and she's not to do any of that. And it was great, I went to the nuns and I said, you have to let me go to church. I have to be saved. And, and so, so I would go and I would listen to the sermons. And the other thing that happened when I went to Catholic school was that I can get that. The other thing that happened when I went to Catholic school was that a guy came, there was like the beginning of the year, and they would come with the instruments to see which instrument you wanted to play, and they would lay them all out. And I walked up to the saxophone, and like I just had never seen anything. I think it may have been the day I began to really love women, because like I had never seen anything so beautiful in my life. And I just think of like just the way it was so beautiful, and there was something about it that I just loved so much. And I said to my father, I want that. I want to play that. And the guy said, it's going to be hard for a girl. So, but what happened was that I ended up playing the saxophone, and the saxophone outlasted Catholic school, and I moved to a different kind of town, and I would sit in my room with my little Fisher-Price record player, and I would play Dexter Gordon, and I would play Jackie McLean, and I would sit there and I would just try to make it sound like something. I mean, I would just, like they would have us playing like Phil Collins at school, and I'd be like, whoa. And then I'd, be sitting there like trying, and I couldn't do, and for various reasons I stopped playing that. But I think that a lot of the cadence in my work and in my reading has to do with both of those things, and not so much the church and the music, but also the cadence of trying, like the cadence of, you know what I mean, like pushing against this kind of silence that is perhaps that place you want to get to so badly and can't. And so I think of my work as, and this new book has a very different kind of cadence than the first.
And it's called Apocalyptic Swing.
It's called Apocalyptic Swing, and which has something to do with music and boxing, because there's a lot of boxing, and also to various things that move in that direction. So yeah.
Do you want to? I mean, Pat, I know music. I don't, but music is major in a lot of your but.
Well, my first book, Rise, was it's all about music, and that book was for me not just about the subject of, it tries to tell American history through black music, and but it's also a very personal book, and I talk in there about my childhood, and I played the trombone as a kid, and I still fool around with it now as an adult. And I played in a house band, doing house parties and stuff, R&B and funk. And so that was the music that was in my head, but I was also playing jazz and listening to a lot of jazz as a kid. The same way, Weather Report and J.J. Johnson and these guys. And trying to find a voice musically first, and similar situation of coming from a blue collar family, going to college and saying I want to be a musician, and I'm saying no, you can't do that. You got to do something more practical, and so it's always tethered to the back of my mind in the writing, and I think I'm still trying to find a beat. When you're we call it meter, but it's the same thing. I mean, you're just trying to find that. That rhythm that fits the content.
I was just thinking the other day about a conversation that I had. One of my buddies I grew up with, Terrence. He said, he's like, doesn't it amaze you when you meet somebody who doesn't like music? And I thought to myself, I don't know anybody who doesn't like music. And to me, it was such a phenomenon to know that T had met somebody. Like he loves music and he's trying to have this conversation with this person. And he was like, "No, I'm not into it." And I just never met anybody who did not like music. I think everybody here likes music. Some of you like bad music. You know who you are. But you like music, right? But regardless, it's like the thing. It's the thing that you can't help it. It's like poetry. Not everybody's gonna like poetry, but everybody loves music. So in some way, I want my poems to be able to approach that kind of that kind of widespread joy and like affection for something, a shared kind of joy, the way that music can have that. And the thing about music is you can kind of have a shared joy, but you can also have a private relationship with music at the same time. You can have both things in that. I would love to write that poem. There's the anecdote of Pablo Neruda when he gave this reading to thousands of people in Chile. And he's reciting his poem from memory, but he forgets it somewhere in the middle. And like every single person in the audience finishes the poem for him. That's the poem I want to write.
Yeah.
What were the specific? What is the case? You talked about being a rapper. What were you looking for? No, you meant that's your own words.
Yeah.
So what were you?
Well, yeah, I could never get into a cipher and rap very well. But hip hop was definitely, as a dancer, like I found out that the guys of my generation who do rap, or even the younger guys, they actually listen to lyrics. But because I was a dancer, I was really only listening to the beat. I realized I don't really know a whole lot of lyrics. So hip hop was big. I studied jazz pretty seriously as an amateur. I worked really late at night at this little local television station in a master control room, and the only other guy in the room at 2 o'clock in the morning was this guy, Fred Patella, who graduated from Manhattan Conservatory, and he would bring in these original manuscripts of like Philip Glass, and he brought in Hindemith's theory of harmony, and like he would teach me about like first species counterpoint, and like I learned about like really basic music theory, and I kind of took it off on my own. So I mean, all over the place. I mean, from Hindemith to John Coltrane to Tila Rock to the kundimans that my dad would play on the piano, to the lullabies that my mom would make up when she would try to put my brother to sleep, like all that stuff, and trying to find a way to, like, that's not. It seems like chaos to you all, but it's not chaos up in here. So when I'm composing the poem, like I want to be able to move in and out of those things.
Right. Well, anybody have questions, or we can open it up, or were we going to ask questions of each other, or?
I mean, one thing I am interested in, because I think all of us, when we think about, I've been trying all week. All I kept thinking about all week was the first time you called a radio station to dedicate a song to somebody. I've been thinking about all week, and I've been thinking about that in terms of poetry, and that sort of like yearning and that waiting. And we've been talking a lot about sound and music, but I guess I'm interested in a little bit, because I think both of you use silence in a way that I really value as well. And I don't know if there's anything to be said about that, but that's something I would say aloud, and I wonder if it's something you could talk about or think about. I mean, that idea of pause and the way the breath works a narrative that is unspoken. I don't know.
I'm gonna have to think about that for a minute, but the one thing I do keep in mind is the spaces between.
Yeah.
Between whether it's action or whether it's sound in the poem. And so irrespective of whether I'm describing a scene and some action within it, or whether it's the actual utterance of the language, I'm also conscious of the links between them. And often that's the spaces, the silence, and the inaction, because then that helps to define what's happening in the poem, or helps to define something that you're going to hear that's going to be more important. And I think we often think as poets about stresses, and that stress being the thing that is to be emphasized, but then things can be stressed by how they're positioned around what's not being said as well. And I think whenever I'm struggling with trying to say something in a poem, I do think about, well, is there a way to just deal with the struggle to say it without actually having to say it? I mean, the struggle to say it is enough sometimes, and that's enough of the silence.
Right.
I agree.
You can't say it better.
Right on.
Mike, as the poets were reading it, sort of was reminiscent. I kept thinking, this is not like John Ashbery. I kept going, it's not like John Ashbery, and it's like Ginsberg. It reminded me of the early of that confluence of jazz, improvisational poetry, especially like Powell, and also William Carlos Williams, like Patterson, and poems like that. The intensely autobiographical element, the musical element. And like I always thought that the derivation that rap came out of early the early jazz movement and the kind of the improvisational jazz movement and the way in which it segued into certain kinds of poetry. I just throw that out.
I think that's very observant. I hadn't really thought, at least consciously, linking you in that way. But yes, I think.
I mean, were you guys in? I mean, do you think about people like Ginsberg, or is that? Those, what are some of the influences on your work in terms of, you've talked about life, but in terms
we haven't talked. That's right. That's okay. Yeah, we haven't talked about formal influences, and other than Cornelius Eady, who were you all the first people that you either studied or started to read and started to translate a lot of, say, community or local experience or personal experience you started to turn to as you translated that into art, into.
Well, I was going to write The Tempest, but Shakespeare was born 400 years. Shakespeare was big. Like, I had a liberal arts education, so like Shakespeare and Blake were really big. But then also, my first creative writing class was with Paul Ganega. He introduced me to like living voices. Allen Ginsberg was one of them. Amiri Baraka was definitely one of them. Robert Hayden was somebody whom I discovered during that time too. So very early on.
Yeah, when I think about poets that I found myself tracing, trying to follow the syntax of their work and the structure and form of their work. Hayden is certainly someone I've learned a great deal from reading his work. And I think about the people who came before the Beats, really. I mean, who really started the music with Harlem Renaissance, like Langston Hughes, Sterling Brown, these guys, and how the influence that they had on American language and internationally as well, as they traveled around the globe. And so for me, that's the music that I hear. That's the language that I hear in when I'm trying to extend a tradition, as I'm trying to write. One, not just because I connect culturally with the iconography within the work, but also because the work works on two frequencies. I mean, at one level, it's formal, and there's formal qualities to it. I mean, the blues is the only American poetic form, so there's that. So there's the blues and the jazz and these other qualities to it. But then there's also this accessibility that Pat was talking about. So you could hear Connie Cullen, it could be a sonnet, but people didn't have to know that. They just connected with what was being said, and that part is seductive. You think about how seductive a poem can be. It becomes like a song, because it has a certain formal quality to it. There's a certain sonic quality to it, but then on top of that, it's saying something as well. And so those are the poets when I think about people early on that influenced me. But I'm also thinking about how you have to identify yourself first in the work. And so if you don't find yourself in the work, you can't really connect to these other writers. So I read Williams, for instance, because Cornelius Eady said it was an influence on him, and then you keep going back and back and back. But you have to find yourself or locate yourself first, and then go from there to connect with others.
Yeah, I agree with that very much. You know, and for
Well,
me,
didn't you say earlier that you were actually started writing? It wasn't even poetry, just started putting some of this.
yeah, I mean, I don't think I knew what I was doing or what I was writing, or it wasn't until I got to high school. I left public school. I wasn't really safe in that school anymore for various and I well, I just wasn't, and so I went to this very good boarding school. I was a day student, and in one year, Seamus Heaney and Donald Hall came and read, and I worked at a bookstore that was going under right around then, and that was sort of great for me because I would just sit and read all day, and I didn't have anyone to tell me how to make my way into any kind of canon. So what I just did is I went and I got Seamus Heaney's book and I looked at the back and there were like blurbs, and so I went and I was like, all right. So I started going. I like went from blurb to blurb to blurb. But the amazing thing is that if you do that, you start reading you start reading communities. Right. Like you don't just start reading like you start and then somewhere in the blurb someone would say something at some point about Wallace Stevens, and I would all right. And then I grew up in Hartford. And Wallace Stevens was was an insurance guy in Hartford. So I came to it in this sort of very strange way. But it's interesting. The poet, as I got older, who really influenced my work tremendously, was a poet that I didn't like in high school, and that was Robert Frost. And I really, I was not interested in Frost when I was in high school, and I think he had not been taught to me particularly well. And it wasn't until, because I didn't like his work very much, I said I was going to read him book by book. Like I was going to go to the library and I was going to get each book, and I was going to, so I could really talk about why he stunk. And I just was going to go piece by piece. And I got to North of Boston, only book number 2. And I couldn't believe it. It was not it was my mother's Frost, but it was not anybody else in my family's Frost. And the amount of real terror and the notion that he was a nature poet, but he was a nature poet insofar as the idea that he was there was this terror of what was and what is more terrifying, if there is something out there or if there is nothing out there. I mean, constantly in that book, people are looking into the darkness and saying, what is out there? What you see? There's always these moments of you see, and the other person says, "I see," and then the other person says, "You don't see." You don't see. And there's one moment in that book, in this poem called "The Fear," that changed my life as a young poet, because there's this husband and wife. Many of these are persona poems, and they're looking out into the darkness, and there is a figure out there who could be death or the devil, or it just could be someone passing through. That's sort of the bargain with Frost. And the woman is looking, and I can't see, and the voice from the darkness says, "Do you want to see? Because I can come forward into the light if you want to see." Which is, I think it's the bargain. Talk about the dream, And that moment, it spoke to everything about my rural upbringing, everything to what it was I used to go out in my PJs and stand against the woods and with my back to them. I was a strange kid. But like in the middle of the night, as long as I could stand there until I would hear something and I would have to start running. And I never knew why I did it, but in the middle of the night I would creep out. And Frost did that too. And that changed my life as a poet. So, that part of it. Yeah.
For any of the poets, I just was wondering if you pick up a book of poetry that maybe somebody you know or somebody you don't know, do you always read it aloud? Are there any poets that you don't read aloud? How do you?
I do. For me, that's the litmus test. If I don't like the way it sounds, I don't want to buy it. I don't want.
So if you like it, you start reading it out loud. But if you don't, it doesn't.
Yeah. Well, if it doesn't have any sonic quality to it, I'm not attracted to it enough to stay with it. And I don't know if that's not intellectual enough or whatever, but it's just that.
Do you know that without reading it aloud? When it's just on the page, you look at it?
Yeah, I can kind of hear it and think, oh, I can't wait to take this home and read it aloud, because I know it's going to be good to hear it. And then, at the same time, I'm looking forward to bringing it to the classroom to read it aloud, in that way as well. So, yeah.
I have a question. Dan, for any of you. When you're writing persona poem, do you find that it frees you? Do you know me? Do you find some freedom in that? If you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. I didn't read from any of Magnolia tonight, but I was thinking that that book, Magnolia, is my second book, and it tells the story of Magnolia Cox, who was born. Who not was born. She actually was made to the final round of 1936 spelling bee. She was the first African American to get to the final round of 1936 spelling bee. And I tell her story, from her adulthood backwards to her childhood, her moment of greatest potential. And when I think about this book, I think that's probably the book that has the most of me in it, because I'm completely unvarnished in whatever I want to say, and I can say it in a way that I couldn't say it in the first book. And even now, with the poems I have here that are some of these poems that are that have an I, have an I in these again, but the personas in this book are definitely, I think, more revealing of my heart, than the I. And I'm much more conscious of it. I think I find that's one of the things I really admire about both of you guys and your work, is that when I hear poets who can put the I out there with that level of honesty and just lack of self-conscious. It's lack of being just being self-aware of yourself and the world and how people are going to perceive it. I'm attracted to that, because when I'm writing a poem and the I is there, I'm always conscious of how people are going to perceive this, and it bugs me, But when I'm writing in the voice of a comic book superhero or Magnolia or Einstein or someone else, I can say anything that I believe.
Weren't we talking about this last night, sort of where you're going, or what sort of indirection or persona, and you mentioned Amelia Earhart, of writing in different voices or different persona, or
Yeah, at some point a couple of years ago, the poems, I was getting a different kind of gratification, I'll say it that way, by writing poems that were not about me. I've started this novel in verse now with these two characters, Willie and Yolanda, and kind of discovering the landscape that they live in. They live in this kind of like fantastical urban landscape, and there's something about that. Like in the same way, a little of me is in Willie and Yolanda also, and some of you all are in the book, and but there's something liberating about transforming the self, or the things that the self perceives and takes in from the world, and transforming that in language on the page. There's another kind of gratification that happens.
She was asking you.
Yeah, speaking of transferring language on the web, I found this poem of yours called Danny something something, and it's completely incomprehensible language. Now, what's that?
I don't know what the poem that is.
I think it's yours.
Oh, well, it would be comprehensible if you were from the Ilocos region of the Philippines.
That's what I wondered.
Yeah.
And what would you expect somebody who doesn't speak that dialect or whatever? I speak Spanish, but not that dialect. So, what would you expect somebody to hear there or read there?
Well,
do you want to read just so people will know what I'm talking about?
This is. Let me say what this is. When I came back from the Philippines, Ilocano, which is my parents' native dialect from the Philippines. It's really my third language. So English is my first, Spanish is my second, Ilocano is my third. But when I came back from the Philippines, it was probably the highest level of fluency that I had ever had, and I wrote this poem, which is a kind of a tribute to the city of my mom's birth and the people there. I'll read the first stanza. It means a poem for Lawag. Danyo ti Lawag. Adda ili jay unag ti puso ket addo ta tao sa jay. Jaka mo tinagnagan da amin nga mamok nga dada. Agbiag da sa jay, trabaho da sa jay, agbartak damat. Mangmanganda ti inabraw na imas ket di da amin mo tinagan ko. So that's the wow.
Okay, a few more questions, or we can really just go. People can leave and we go on talking too. So, yeah, go ahead.
One question, because we've talked about formal training, which referred to history and then recent history in terms of your growing up. But in terms of since it's a roundtable of young poets, how has the current technology affected the way you write, and how do you think it would have affected those who influenced you from the past, such as William Carlos Williams and Allen Ginsberg? I mean, how would they handle blogging? How would the tools affect them in terms of their creativity?
Williams would be good at text messages, man. He's the only guy. Red Wheelbarrow, you get that whole thing in one text message, man.
When you send it, the form might get messed up.
But I mean, even the fact that someone found a piece of your poetry through the internet, I mean, the fact that your work is so naked and bare out there, I mean, how has that influenced your creative choices, knowing that people will find your work not even just in books, but virtually, Or does it? Do all people blog? I mean,
I don't.
I do. I mean, in terms of the work, I don't think that the technology is really. I get the sense, and I think that, I mean, I'm not the first person to say it, but the book is kind of a dying technology, right? So you wonder what does that mean for poems? I mean, there's also this resurgence in the last 15 years of like spoken word and slam poetry. People who are not considered kind of spoken word people. Young Lee's new book's got a CD in it. Nobody's calling him a spoken word poet, right? But he has access now to a kind of technology that allows his living voice to be distributed in ways that it wasn't before. I mean, I'm happy that we have recordings of Dylan Thomas, who was a riveting reader, So, to be able to kind of distribute one's work without the limitations of time is kind of an amazing thing. But then there's a great responsibility. You gotta write something that's worth it.
Okay, is it Frank, is it all right? Why don't watching the conversation just go on? Yes, back there.
Sure.
Let people leave and we're staying.
It's really interesting. You've been talking about pulling music into poetry, but there's years ago, it seems to me the lyrics of lots of songs, especially love songs, pull poetry into the music. For example, Moonlight in Vermont is based on a haiku poem. Moonlight in Vermont, falling leaves, a sycamore. So that uses a haiku poem. Then there are so many fantastic lyrics like somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, da 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 da. It goes like that. So it's interesting. That goes back and forth. Right?
The Kundiman is a traditional song itself. Is a traditional.
Yeah, the Kundiman it's a Filipino song of unrequited love. It's usually sung by a man to a woman, and the woman saying hell no, and the man is saying please.
I just want to offer an observation on your experiences with finding freedom in the persona poems. I actually started as a poet, and then I became a sort of nonfiction writer, and I published a memoir some years ago, which was well reviewed. And now I'm writing fiction, and I'm finding incredible freedom in the fiction to get into emotional areas that I never, so it's the same thing, I think. I feel like it's the same thing.
Because I mean, you have, I like to work with historical figures a lot, and so you'll have that framework, but then you kind of approximate the emotion around it, and that's what I feel like you.
But you can enter it in some ways.
Yeah.
You have to be so much more controlled when you're writing in the first person.
Yeah.
Okay, we'd have one more question, and then then we're formally done. Okay, one more question, and then we'll continue informally.
Can you three talk a minute about how you come to the formal structure of a poem? When you're starting a poem, because you talked a little bit about the forms, and sometimes that disappears from me, and sometimes I'm more aware. Actually, mostly it disappears. But how do you come to the form? Do you consciously decide, or is it work with the words you have in your head, or how does that work?
I think it depends on the poem for me. I mean, those drive-in poems, once I realized what they were actually going to be about, I became very nervous about, the material seemed so huge for me. And so the idea of making those poems that had to do with pornography and desire, making those poems into a crown of sonnets felt both like a way to sort of contain a kind of energy that I felt could very easily just sort of explode out in a way that would actually make the poems really diffuse, or diffuse the power of the poem. But also there was the notion of the kind of musculature that could be added to that through the way the sonnet works and our expectations of the sonnet, the kind of conversation we have with history when we work in a really strict form. For me, probably, so that's one moment where I decided ahead of time to write in a more strict form, although those sonnets are quite loose. But for me, the thing that really changed my life formally was thinking about syllabics and how to work in syllabics, because to me, working in syllabics was one of those ways that you could actually control the poem from behind without the reader necessarily. I think when you have a villanelle or a sonnet or a sestina, one of the remarkable things about it is the reader can see immediately what it is, and immediately a kind of dialogue begins with lots of other poets and the form. With syllabics, it takes the reader, I think, very often feels it in their body first. Something is going on. I am drawn in. Something is happening. But if they even pick up on specifically what it is, it takes longer, and so there's a different kind of wrestling that goes on. So.
What do you mean by syllabics?
Making the choice to have a specific number of syllables per line, alternating pattern. Just like there's a kind of magic, for instance, in alternating an even number and an odd number of syllables back and forth. Like there's something about the 9-8 or 8-9 pattern that is remarkable.
Iams you're talking about?
No, I'm just talking about actual syllables in the line. And that's the thing. So it's non-iams. It's the idea of something that actually mirrors conversational speech a little bit more. It's also one of the best ways. I was writing these incredibly long poems and I had no idea how to revise. And Richard Howard, who changed my life in millions of ways, but one of the ways he did that was talk to me about syllabics as a means of also pulling back. So yeah.
Did you get the syllabics from? I know Richard Howard uses a lot of Greek syllabic form, which I never really understood. Did you try that, or did you just do the syllable count?
More of a syllable count, because he sat with me and he said, there's a magic. If you really do it, you'll find the magic in the count. And he was absolutely right. He was absolutely right.
Oh no, I was just kind of piggybacking off that. My second book is almost all syllabics.
Yeah.
And for me, I think of formal qualities of poetry as being sort of like, arpeggios or scales for a musician. We don't really have anything else that we can practice, and I tell my students all the time that it doesn't matter whether you're good at the sonnet or if you're, good at sestinas or villanelles or whatever. You should just practice doing them. And I've never written I've written many pantoons, but I've never written a good one. But at the same time, I'll start there sometimes if I feel that the subject matter could be contained within this. And then if it doesn't work, I'll break out of it. But that'll be my way into the structure of that poem. And I'm more concerned with that process of working through the formal qualities of the poem and seeing how, seeing things that I may not normally think to wrestle with or deal with within the poem through the form. So I'll look at a subject maybe through the restrictions of a form, and it'll force me to say something or do something I wouldn't normally say if I had the freedom to just, do it in free verse. Because I'm now working within this exoskeleton, but within it, the guts of it, I can roam free. But it's also going to call me to make certain moves that I wouldn't normally think to make if I didn't have that structure, preset for me.
Gabby, are you?
This is the last question. Okay, last one. Go ahead.
Maybe we were in the informal yet. In your crown, though, were they placed in different sections of your book?
Yeah, they're spread throughout. I wanted, because the book had all these long series of persona poems, I wanted there to be a sense, because for me, having grown up sort of watching the movies in the way that I did, I wanted there to be a sense that there was this eye that was moving through the book. And sort of, as the eye was looking at the screen and these bodies and trying to make sense of them, in a very similar way that so many people in that book are just looking at the events in front of them, at the kind of narrative and trying to place themselves within it. So that was one of the decisions about breaking it up like that.
Did you think also too, like somehow the crown just gets to be too much for
Yes.
the next stage?
Yeah, and the incredible pleasure of picking up the crown pages later. Yeah.
I can tell you.
Okay, we're staying up here, so come up and keep asking questions. And thank you very much. Great.
Further information about our programs and a complete archive of past Philip Tatey's events is available at philiptatys.org.